June 19, 1944, 10:02 Western Pacific, Philippine Sea. The radar room aboard the Japanese carrier Shōkaku hums with static. A young petty officer leans closer to the glowing scope, eyes narrowing. The green sweep circles again and again. Each pass brings more echoes, not scattered, not random. A wall. His fingers tight around the edge of the console. Contact, multiple contacts, bearing 085, range increasing fast. Across the compartment, another operator snaps upright. He steps closer, squinting at the screen. Too many blips. Too dense. Too organized. Outside, the sea is calm. A long, rolling blue plain under a blinding sun. The carrier's deck crews go about their routines unaware. Fighters sit lined up on deck, wings folded like resting birds. The smell of fuel hangs in the air. Somewhere below, pilots drink tea and smoke, waiting for orders that haven't come yet. Inside the radar room, the air is stale, thick, the kind that sticks to the back of your throat. The petty officer swallows. "Sir, I think it's an incoming strike. Large formation." The lieutenant on duty frowns. He checks his watch, then the scope, then the range again. "That's impossible," he says. "Our scouts haven't reported anything. The Americans are too far out." Another sweep. More returns. The screen is filling. "Sir, they're coming in fast." The lieutenant hesitates, then turns and reaches for the phone. Shōkaku is one of Japan's last great fleet carriers, a survivor of Pearl Harbor, a veteran of Coral Sea, a ship with scars and pride and a reputation that still carries weight in the Imperial Navy. Her crew believes she is untouchable. The Americans have not been seen. Not yet. The lieutenant finally speaks into the receiver. "Radar contact, possible large enemy formation, requesting confirmation." The response comes back sharp and irritated. "Disregard, no visual contact, likely interference." The line clicks dead. The petty officer stares at the screen. The blips multiply. Across the sea, far beyond the horizon, the sky is already black. Hundreds of aircraft rise from American carriers in tight formation. F-6F Hellcats, wings glinting in the sun. Dauntless dive bombers. Avengers heavy with torpedoes. Their engines roar in layered thunder, rolling across the ocean like an approaching storm. On the deck of the USS Essex, flight crews wave them off one by one. The deck shakes under the power. The smell of oil and exhaust burns the nose. Pilots lift their goggles, scanning the sky ahead. They know where they're going. They know what's waiting. Rear Admiral Mark Mitcher stands on the bridge of his flagship Lexington, binoculars raised. His task force stretches for miles in every direction. 15 carriers, more than 900 aircraft. The largest carrier fleet the world has ever seen. His orders are simple. Destroy the Japanese Navy's remaining air power, and make sure it never rises again. Back aboard Shōkaku, the radar room is now alive with motion. Officers move in and out. Voices rise. A commander leans over the operator's shoulder. "How many?" The petty officer hesitates. "At least 200, sir, possibly more." The commander stiffens. 200. That is not a glitch. That is not interference. That is an invasion of the sky. He turns sharply and storms out. Moments later, claxons erupt across the carrier. "General quarters, general quarters, all hands man your battle stations." The calm deck explodes into motion. Crewmen sprint for cover, pilots run for their aircraft. Mechanics tear wheel chocks away. Engines cough, then roar to life. The sky is still empty. The sea still calm. But something is coming. In the Japanese flagship Taihō, Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa listens as reports flood in. Radar contacts, scout planes failing to return, conflicting bearings. He stands with his hands behind his back, face unreadable. Ozawa commands the first Mobile fleet, what remains of Japan's once invincible carrier force. He has 9 carriers under his flag, hundreds of aircraft. But most of his pilots are boys, rushed through training, given only a fraction of the hours their predecessors once had, brave, loyal, and hopelessly unprepared for what waits beyond the horizon. Still, Ozawa believes in doctrine, in discipline, in the idea that Japan can still deliver a decisive blow. He orders his own strike launched. Wave after wave of Zeros, dive bombers and torpedo planes lift from Japanese decks, climbing into the blue. They fly straight into history. The first American radar picket ships detect them almost immediately. Bogies inbound, multiple groups, Angels 15. On American carriers, pilots run for their planes. Deck crews move with machine precision. Hellcats are rolled into position. Ammo belts snap into place. Engines howl. Aboard the USS Bunker Hill, a young pilot named Lieutenant David McCampbell straps in. He adjusts his oxygen mask and pulls his canopy down. He has a feeling, the kind that sits in your stomach. This is going to be big. The launch signal flashes. His Hellcat surges forward and drops away into open sky. The 2 air fleets race toward each other. One side armed with radar, coordination, and overwhelming numbers. The other flying blind. Back on Shōkaku, the sky to the east begins to darken. At first it looks like a distant storm. Then the sun catches on metal. Hundreds of wings. Hundreds of propellers. The horizon fills. The petty officer from the radar room stands frozen on the deck, staring. So this is what the screen was trying to tell them. The first American fighters break formation and dive. Black dots grow larger. Vast. Too fast. Someone screams. Fighters incoming. The sky is no longer blue. It is alive. And it is falling. High above, McCampbell spots the Japanese formation below. Long lines of aircraft, flying straight and steady, unaware of the swarm descending on them. He keys his radio. Here they come, boys. The Hellcats roll over and plunge. The first bursts of gunfire tear into the Japanese ranks. Aircraft explode. Wings shear off. Engines burst into flame. Parachutes bloom, then vanish into smoke. The battle has begun, and the Imperial Navy has no idea how badly it is about to lose. On the deck of Shōkaku, anti-aircraft guns open up, filling the air with black flak bursts. Tracers stitch across the sky. Crewmen shield their faces from falling debris. The first American bombs scream down. The ocean erupts around the carrier. Shockwaves ripple through the hull. The sky has turned into a killing field. And this is only the beginning. Because what the radar operators saw was just the first wave. Behind it, more are coming. And by nightfall, the world will call it the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. But for the men standing on these decks, watching the sky fall in pieces around them, it is simply the end. The first Japanese aircraft never make it to the American fleet. They die in open sky. Above the Philippine Sea, the air becomes a layered maze of contrails, smoke plumes, and falling wreckage. Hellcats slice through the formation in diving passes, their 6.50 caliber machine guns ripping apart fuselages and wings. Japanese planes try to break formation, but it's already too late. They are flying into a wall. Lieutenant David McCampbell rolls onto the tail of a Zero, climbing too slowly. He squeezes the trigger. The enemy fighter disintegrates in a burst of flame. Pieces spin away, tumbling into the ocean thousands of feet below. Splash 1. He pulls up, scanning. There are targets everywhere. It feels unreal. The Japanese pilots were trained to fight men, not machines. Their Zeros are light, agile, deadly in a turning fight. But the Hellcat is faster, stronger, and built to absorb punishment. It can dive steeper, climb harder, survive hits that would tear a Zero apart. And today, the Americans own the altitude. Wave after wave of Japanese aircraft rise from Ozawa's carriers and fly straight into a furnace. American radar tracks them from over 100 miles out. Controllers vector fighters with calm precision. Bandits bearing 075, range 50 miles, Angels 12. Hellcats launch in perfect timing. The Japanese pilots never see them coming. In the cockpit of a Japanese dive bomber, Ensign Hiroshi Tanaka grips his controls as flak bursts pepper the sky around him. His formation is already scattered. Smoke trails mark where friends once flew. He spots the American carriers ahead, tiny shapes on a massive blue plane. So close. Then a shadow crosses his canopy. A Hellcat flashes past. His aircraft shudders as bullets tear through the wing. The engine screams. The nose dips. Tanaka fights the controls, trying to keep her steady. Another burst. The cockpit fills with smoke. The ocean rushes up. There is no time to think. Only falling. On the bridge of Admiral Mitcher's flagship, officers watch the radar screens with growing disbelief. Enemy strike groups destroyed. Another report comes in. Second wave intercepted, heavy losses inflicted. Then another. Third wave broken up before reaching the fleet. Mitcher lowers his binoculars slowly. The Japanese are throwing everything they have. And losing it all. At sea level, American destroyers carve white wakes as they race to rescue downed pilots. Aviators bob in the water, waving, clinging to rafts, watching the sky burn above them. The sound is constant. Engines. Gunfire. Explosions. The crack of flak. The dull thud of bodies and debris hitting the ocean. Oil slicks spread across the surface. Pieces of aircraft float like twisted confetti. The Philippine Sea is becoming a graveyard. Back on the Japanese carriers, panic sets in. Radio reports grow frantic. First strike destroyed. Second strike suffering heavy losses. Unable to locate enemy fleet. Admiral Ozawa stands silent. His chief of staff reads the casualty estimates again. They are catastrophic. Pilot after pilot gone. Aircraft after aircraft erased. The elite air arm of the Imperial Navy, rebuilt in desperate haste after Midway, is being annihilated in a single day. Ozawa knows what this means. Without pilots, carriers are just steel hulls. And Japan has no replacements. The Americans, meanwhile, are barely breaking a sweat. Hellcats land, refuel, rearm, and launch again within minutes. Deck crews move like clockwork. Worn tires are swapped. Bullet holes are patched with metal plates and rivets. Pilots climb out, shaking, laughing, swearing. Some can't stop grinning. Others can't stop staring. They have never seen anything like this. One Hellcat pilot lands, with 6 kill marks painted on his fuselage. 6. In a single sortie. Lieutenant McCampbell lands and taxis forward, canopy sliding back. His hands are still trembling. A crew chief runs up. "How many, sir?" McCampbell exhales. 5, maybe 6. The crew chief just stares at him. Then grins. Out beyond the fleet, a new danger emerges. American submarines. The Japanese carriers, maneuvering desperately, are being tracked beneath the waves. The USS Albacore spots Taihō, Ozawa's flagship, through its periscope. Torpedoes fire. White trails race toward the carrier. A frantic Japanese pilot spots them and dives his plane into the water, detonating one prematurely. But another strikes home. A dull explosion ripples through Taihō's hull. At first, the damage seems minor. Then fuel vapors begin to spread, and a time bomb starts ticking deep inside the ship. By afternoon, the sky has gone quiet. The Japanese have nothing left to throw. Over 300 aircraft lie at the bottom of the Philippine Sea. The American losses are minimal. The imbalance is staggering. It is no longer a battle. It is a collapse. On Shōkaku, deck crews attempt to recover the few surviving aircraft limping home. Planes land with shredded wings, leaking fuel, and wounded pilots slumped in their seats. 1-0 skids off the deck and plunges into the ocean. No one moves. There are no cheers. Only the sound of the wind and the distant rumble of explosions. Admiral Ozawa finally speaks. "We have lost our air power." His officers look at him, some with disbelief, some with hollow eyes. They all understand. The war has just changed, and Japan can no longer control the skis. But the day is not over, and the sea has not finished claiming its victims. Because below the waves, more torpedoes are already on their way. The first explosion aboard Taihō is small, almost forgettable. A dull thud below the waterline, a brief shudder through the hull, a few startled crewmen glancing at one another, waiting for the next order. Damage control teams rush in, sealing compartments. Pumps engage. Reports flow upward. Minimal flooding. Ship maintains speed. Admiral Ozawa allows himself a breath. But deep inside the carrier, aviation fuel has begun to leak. Vapors creep through ventilation shafts, invisible, odorless, deadly. And no one realizes what they're breathing. At 2:32 p.m., someone lights a cigarette. The spark becomes a fireball. The explosion tears through the hangar deck like a thunderclap. The blast blows elevator shafts apart and throws aircraft into the ceiling. Men are lifted off their feet and slammed into steel bulkheads. The Taihō shudders, then slows. Flames roll through the ship's interior. Black smoke pours from every opening. Ozawa's flagship, pride of the Imperial Navy, is suddenly dying. He is rushed off the bridge as the carrier lists. Within hours, Taihō slips beneath the waves. The admiral is transferred to the cruiser Haguro. His fleet is now without a heart. Not far away, Shōkaku is hunted. The veteran carrier that survived Pearl Harbor, Coral Sea, and Santa Cruz is now alone. The USS Cavala stalks her through the depths, periscope fixed, calculations steady. 4 torpedoes leave the submarine. The sea erupts. Shōkaku is struck again and again. Explosions rip through her hull, aviation fuel ignites, the deck buckles, planes slide into the ocean. Within minutes, the carrier begins to roll. Crewmen jump overboard as flames climb the superstructure. At 3:01 p.m., Shōkaku capsizes and disappears. One of Japan's greatest warships is gone. Across the fleet, the reality settles in. 3 carriers sunk. Hundreds of aircraft destroyed. Most of their remaining pilots dead. The first Mobile fleet still floats, but it can no longer fight. As the sun begins to drop toward the horizon, the Americans launch one final massive strike. Not because they need to, but because they can. Over 200 aircraft roar off the decks, chasing the retreating Japanese fleet westward. They find them at extreme range just before sunset. Low on fuel, low on daylight, but eager. The attack hits hard. Bombs fall. Torpedoes streak. Another carrier, Hio, is mortally wounded. She burns through the night before finally sinking. Darkness comes fast. The American pilots turn for home. The problem is distance. They are flying farther than ever before, and many are running on fumes. Admiral Mitcher makes a decision no one has ever made in carrier warfare. He orders the fleet to turn on all deck lights. Searchlights, signal lamps, anything. He lights up the carriers like cities. A beacon in the dark. He knows it risks submarine attack. He does it anyway. Turn the lights on, he says. They're coming home. The night sky fills with lost planes. Engines sputter. Fuel gauges drop. Pilots scan the darkness, desperate for any sign of the fleet. Then they see it. A glowing line on the horizon. Home. Some make it. Some ditch. Some crash into the sea just short of the decks. Rescue crews race to pull men from the water. Hands reach up through black waves. Flares burn. Engines die. The ocean swallows the unlucky. By dawn, the Philippine Sea is quiet again. Smoke drifts where ships once sailed. Wreckage floats for miles. The birds circle. The war has just crossed a line. Japan has lost the last of its carrier air arm. The pilots who once ruled the Pacific sky are gone, replaced by boys who never stood a chance. And across the water, the Americans know it. They have broken the enemy's wings. Admiral Ozawa stares across the deck of Haguro. His fleet limps westward. He has lost everything that made it dangerous. No air power. No striking arm. No future. The radar operators were right. The sky did turn black. And when it cleared, nothing remained. The Battle of the Philippine Sea will soon get a name. A cruel one. The Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. Because to the Americans, it felt like target practice. But for the Imperial Navy, it was extinction. And from this day forward, Japan will never again challenge control of the Pacific seas. The sun rises over the Philippine Sea like nothing happened. The water is glassy, the sky pale and endless. A gentle breeze ripples across oil slicks and floating debris. Pieces of aircraft drift between life rafts. A lone helmet bobs beside a shattered wing. The ocean is trying to forget. American destroyers cut slow arcs through the wreckage fields, stopping again and again to haul exhausted pilots from the water. Men are lifted aboard, soaked, shaking, eyes hollow. Some laugh uncontrollably. Some can't speak. A young ensign sits on the deck of a rescue ship, wrapped in a blanket, staring at the horizon. He keeps asking the same question. Did we really win? No one answers. On the carriers, damaged crews inspect bullet holes and shrapnel scars. Mechanics count returning aircraft. The numbers don't feel real. Over 300 Japanese planes destroyed. Fewer than 30 American losses in air combat. It is the most lopsided carrier battle in history. And everyone aboard knows it. They have just witnessed the end of an era. In the wardroom of the USS Lexington, pilots crowd around a map. Someone has drawn circles where Japanese carriers were last seen. 3 of them are crossed out. One man whistles softly. They're finished. Another shakes his head. They're not finished, they're beaten. There's a difference. Far to the west, Admiral Ozawa's shattered fleet limps home. What remains of the first Mobile fleet moves in silence. No aircraft on deck. No launch crews. No radio chatter except routine navigation. The carriers look intact from a distance. But they are hollow. Steel shells without teeth. In Tokyo, the reports arrive in fragments. First, the loss of aircraft. Then the loss of pilots. Then the loss of carriers. Each message is worse than the last. The admirals read them without speaking. They already know what this means. Japan cannot replace this. Not the planes, Not the ships. Not the men. The factories are bombed. The fuel is running out. The training pipeline is empty. The Empire has just lost the last generation of elite naval aviators it will ever produce. For the Americans, the victory is more than tactical. It is psychological. Midway broke Japan's momentum. The Philippine Sea breaks its future. From now on, the skis belong to the United States Navy. And everyone knows it. On Saipan, Marines fighting ashore hear rumors of the battle. Some don't believe it. 3 carriers sunk. Hundreds of planes. Sounds like propaganda. But when Japanese air attacks never come again, the truth settles in. The enemy no longer owns the air. The Marines dig in with new confidence. The island will fall. And with it, the door to Japan itself will open. That night, aboard the USS Bunker Hill, Lieutenant McCampbell sits alone on the flight deck. The stars are sharp and bright. The sea glows faintly with phosphorescence. His Hellcat rests nearby, bullet holes patched, kill marks freshly painted. He should feel proud. Instead, he feels quiet. He thinks about the pilots he shot down, about the parachutes he saw open and then vanish into cloud, about the ocean swallowing men who never even saw him. War is numbers in reports, but in the sky it is faces. And fire. And falling. The Great Marianas Turkey Shoot becomes legend almost immediately. Newspapers back home print the headline. Radio broadcasters repeat it with disbelief. American carriers destroy Japanese air fleet in historic battle. The public cheers. The Navy smiles. But the men who flew that day remember something else. They remember the radar screens filling with targets. They remember the sky turning black with wings. They remember how fast it all ended. Admiral Mitcher stands on the bridge at sunset, looking west. The horizon is empty now. No enemy. No smoke. Just open sea. He knows the war is far from over. There are still islands to take. Still fleets to fight. Still a homeland bristling with guns. But something fundamental has changed. The balance of the Pacific has tipped for good. And it tipped right here. Over this water. On this day. The radar operators aboard Shōkaku were the first to see it. A wall of aircraft rising from the horizon. A sky that didn't belong to Japan anymore. They were ignored. Dismissed. Overruled. But they were right. And when the sky went black, the empire began to fall. Type continue to generate the final section. Section 5. The day the sky changed forever. The Pacific does not remember battles. It swallows them. By the time the fleets are gone, the only evidence left is a faint sheen of oil and a scattering of debris drifting under the sun. The waves roll on. The wind moves east. The horizon remains endless. But for the men who were there, June 19, 1944 will never fade. Because that was the day the sky changed. In the weeks that follow, American reconnaissance flights sweep across the Philippine Sea. They photograph wreckage fields stretching for miles, twisted wings, broken fuselages, pieces of propellers and fuel tanks drifting like bones. Somewhere below, hundreds of pilots rest in the deep. They went up believing in the old doctrine, believing in the idea of a decisive naval battle, believing that courage and sacrifice could still turn the tide. They never knew they were flying into extinction. In Japan, the truth is softened. The newspapers speak of a setback, a temporary loss, a tactical withdrawal. But inside the Navy, there is no illusion. The carrier air arm is gone. The men who once ruled the skis over Pearl Harbor, over the Indian Ocean, over the Coral Sea, are dead. Their replacements are children. Their fuel is rationed. Their carriers are empty decks. From now on, Japanese ships will sail under American skies. And they will die under American bombs. On Saipan, B-29 bombers soon begin landing on newly built runways. Massive silver giants with black noses and American stars on their wings. They take off toward Japan. Tokyo, Nagoya, Osaka. The homeland is no longer distant. The Great Marianas Turkey Shoot made that possible. It opened the door, and the bombers walk through it. Lieutenant McCampbell returns home a hero. He becomes the Navy's top ace. The newspapers print his photograph. The children write letters. But when he speaks of the battle, his voice always slows. He talks about the radar, about how the enemy never saw them coming, about how fast the sky filled with fire, and how empty it felt afterward. Years later, veterans will gather and tell the story. About the day the Japanese came in waves. About the way the Hellcats tore them apart. About the strange feeling of fighting an enemy who never had a chance. They will shake their heads. We called it the Turkey Shoot, one will say. But it wasn't a joke to the men falling out of the sky. Admiral Ozawa survives the war. So do many of his officers. They watch the empire collapse around them. Island by island. City by city. Firestorms. Surrender. Occupation. And they know exactly when the end truly began. Not at Hiroshima. Not at Nagasaki. Not even at Midway. But on a clear June morning when radar screens filled with ghosts. And the sky turned black with American wings. Somewhere on the ocean floor lie the wrecks of Taihō and Shōkaku. Steel tombs in the dark. Silent witnesses to the last stand of Japan's carrier fleet. Above them ships still pass. Trade routes cross. The sea forgets. But history remembers. The Battle of the Philippine Sea was more than a victory. It was a verdict. A judgment on a war fought in the air. A declaration that the age of the Zero was over. And the age of the carrier empire belonged to America. The radar operators were the first to see it. The pilots were the ones who lived it. And the world would feel its consequences for decades. Because on June 19, 1944, the sky did not just go black. It changed hands. And